All right, can everyone see my screen? Cool. All right. So I'm gonna start out. My little presentation is the Outlaw comic book roots and the queer possibilities of My Chemical Romance's early albums. And this is kind of like an abbreviated, I like to say PG-13 version of a presentation I did at the Popular Culture Association National Conference. And yeah, I'm basically going to be talking about how the Crow and this other book called Faust influenced My Chemical Romance's first two albums. You can see in the slide we've got I Brought You My Bullets, You Brought Me Their Love, their debut, and then Three Cheers for Sweet Revenge, which is really their breakout album on Warner Brothers Records. So yeah, to get things started, a little background. So before Gerard Way was the lead singer of, the platinum selling stadiums selling out, they're selling out baseball stadiums now. My Chemical Romance, he wanted to be a comic book author. So as a teen in the 90s, he worked at a comic book shop in New Jersey. He was really into books like The Crow, Faust, which I'll talk about later, as well as some mainstream stuff like Daredevil, X-Men. It's the 90s. That's what people were into. And when he was 16, he actually wrote his own comic called On Raven's Wings that came out in 1994. You can see the cover art right there. It's very, I mean, it's something, definitely something a teenager would come up with. It's very kind of derivative of like The Crow. It's a dark vigilante serial killer kind of thing. And it was put out by Boneyard Press, which is a very controversial company. They were best known for an unauthorized biography of Jeffrey Dahmer, which made the rounds on the morning talk shows back in the 90s. And so after he graduated high school, he went to the School of Visual Arts and actually got a Bachelor of Fine Arts in cartooning. But as you can see on the slide, he struggled to break into the industry. Um, and I like to think that his struggles breaking into the industry is one reason behind the founding of My Chemical Romance, because he couldn't make it in the comics industry, couldn't make it in the animation industry. So he had to channel his creative energies into um, the music and lyrics of this band. Yeah. So so I'm talking about Outlaw comics. Here's there's a lot of them out there. The two I'm gonna be mainly focusing on are Faust and The Crow. Some of y'all may know The Crow from the 1994 film by Brandon Lee, that starred Brandon Lee. So I'm just going to give a quick little premise. So Faust is you can see the main character with the claws. That is actually a fine artist named John Jaspers, who he was given supernatural powers like the claws by a demonic crime lord named Mephistopheles. And at the beginning of the series, he finds out about this and is on this like violent quest for revenge. This series, it's by David Quinn and Tim Vigil. It's very violent, lots of blood, lots of sex, lots of really weird stuff. It actually was adapted into a film in 2001, but it was like a direct-to-video release, so it never really hit the mainstream, but it's kind of like an example of this genre, which I would describe Outlaw comics as, yeah, extreme violence, extreme sex, extreme black inks, as you'll see later when I show some art. And then The Crow, if y'all, haven't seen the movie, it's about, uh, let's see, it's about the main character is Eric Draven and his girlfriend Shelley are murdered, and Shelley is sexually assaulted by these criminals, and Eric Draven comes back from the dead and to get revenge. So I see a real through line from these books, and Gerard Way has mentioned them in interviews with various podcasts and as well as print interviews. I see a through line between these books and My Chemical Romance's early albums. They're actually their second album, Three Cheers for Sweet Revenge, is a concept album. It's about it's kind of an Orpheus Eurydice situation where a man wants to be reunited with his lost love and makes a deal with the devil. He has to bring 1,000 souls of evil men, but it ends up there's a twist, and he's the thousandth evil man. Um, yeah, so the big connection between these comics and this music is what I like to call a shared universe of violence. So on the left, that is Faust. So that's it's from the first issue of Faust, and it's showing Jasper's basically like eating this guy's head while singing. Papa's Got a Brand New Bag by James Brown. So it kind of shows that like dark humor as well as that over the top violence. And on the right is a panel from The Crow where Eric Draven is cutting off one of the criminals. He cuts off his boots, and it's very there's that like dark kind of sinister sense, and you can see that in some of here's some lyrics from songs on My Chemical Romance's second album, Three Cheers for Sweet Revenge. So another knife in my hands, a stain that never comes off the sheets. I'm so dirty, babe. So that's from the perspective of that assassin from the concept album. And yeah, basically just being overcome by guilt and violence. And then that second one is from Hang 'em High, which is kind of like a dark Western and actually features guest vocals from Keith Morris from the Circle Jerks and Black Flab. And then the third one, probably the most violent lyric that Gerard Way has ever written. It's actually from a demo off a live album. And it's just, yeah, that pure just violence. So, yeah. But there's also kind of one reason why I would say My Chemical Romance and The Crow were able to reach a mainstream audience versus Faust and some of these other books is because there was kind of this whole like kind of androgynous lost masculinity. I For my paper, I drew a lot on the research from Lauren Goodlad, who wrote an essay called Men in Black, Androgyny and Ethics in the Crow and Fight Club. And she talks about this idea of Gothic masculinity that emerged in the 18th century. So in the 18th century is where the public and private spheres kind of were separated. So in public, men had to be providers, patriarchs, leaders, but in private, they could cry while reading poetry, like a Lord Byron type, a romantic, capital R romantic type. And there's this really good line from that essay. The male goth is a figure who troubles gender. Love the pun, the Judith Butler pun, so good. And Goodlad uses the crow and the portrayal of Eric Draven as an example, but I could also see how it connected to Gerard Way and My Chemical Romance, especially if you look at some of those pictures from that era, the corpse makeup, the onstage kissing, which I'll talk about a little bit later. Yeah, so as we saw from that previous slide, The Crow, very violent comic book, but there's also kind of a tragic softness and vulnerability to it, what I like to call detoxified masculinity. And what makes it even more, I don't know, I guess, amazing is that in The Crow, and so in The Crow movie, Eric Draven is like this rock star. He has a band, but in the comic, he is a blue collar auto mechanic because James O'Barr himself was an auto mechanic. So there's like he really does subvert that typical kind of masculinity, and you can see that actually through the art style. So on the left, uh, so so in the present day sequences, James O'Barr uses this really heavy black, very violent. He's gunning down a drug dealer. But then in the flashbacks, he uses this very soft ink wash style of art. So there's this play between violence, but also softness, femininity, and it creates this beautiful androgynous space that kind of comes to fruition in this kind of pinup over here. So yeah. And even James Ellsworth back in the 80s tried to break into Marvel Comics and on working on the Conan title, and actually an editor said that used a homophobic slur to describe his work. So there's always kind of that undercurrent of queerness with his work. And then let's switch over to Mike Kim real quick. Next slide. So there's always this kind of play of violence and softness in their lyrics. So, for example, Helena, which is I think it was a top 40 hit. You can hear like Gerard Way's trembling vocals. He's singing about his grandmother. But then there's songs like I Never Told You What I Did for a Living, which I mentioned earlier. That's all aggressive violence. And then you find more of that balance in the song Thank You for Venom, which opens with like the heaviest riff of the band's career, but then immediately the first lyric, Sister, I'm Not Much a Poet, it's a Morrissey reference. So just kind of, I mean, this is before the problematic Morrissey stuff. This is 2004, but kind of that softness to it. And then once you get to I Know What They Do to Guys Like Prison, which I also call like Gerard Way's Egg Crack song. Um, you get more kind of gender play. So there's a line, my cellmate's a killer, and then you have the line, they make me do push-ups and drag. So you really see that sense of play, the playfulness with gender and sexuality through that song. And I know what they do to guys like us in prison is about life on the road, but also there's kind of that um, subversive gender expression and sexuality. So, for example, Gerard Way would kiss the guitar player Frankie Arrow on stage. He would also kiss Burt McCracken, who was the lead singer of the Used, and also guested on "I Know What They Do to Guys Like Us in Prison." And also that kind of continued that kind of really kind of, I guess, inclusion. You could see it in their music video for "I'm Not Okay," which had two gay jocks in it. Um, Cool. So that's kind of so yeah, early on in their career, 2004, My Chemical Romance is out here exploring queer sexuality through their music, especially in such like a macho genre as hard rock. And if you read a lot of the like periodicals at the time, like Kerrang, they use like homophobic slurs and kind of sexist language towards My Chemical Romance. So yeah, just kind of wrapping up my little presentation. My Chemical Romance and The Crow found mainstream success because they had this redemptive counterbalance, this softness, romance to the extreme violence through, as well as like kind of androgyny. This is a Gerard Way at a concert in Nashville a few years ago. I wish I had been there. Um, Definitely subverting gender. And yeah, so in My Chemical Romance, balanced lyrics about vampires, zombies, serial killers, oozing blood with a message of hope and gender expansiveness. And just kind of wrapping up with the heart of the band from day one was this message of hope and inclusivity. So this line, if the world needs something better, let's give them one more reason now, from their first song, Skylines and Turnstiles, which was written directly in response to 9/11. And then one kind of final thought I have is that it's kind of interesting that um, the queerness of My Chemical Romance was seen as more transgressive at the time than the violence. And it reminded me, it just got me thinking back to 2004. In 2004, Massachusetts was the only state that had legalized gay marriage, but The Passion of the Christ was the number one movie in the box office. Like just extreme, utter violence. Everybody was consuming that versus, two men kissing is so transgressive. So yeah, that was my presentation. So I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and I'm gonna flip it over to um, Izzy. So I'm just gonna read a quick little bio about them. So Isabel Felix Gonzales is a Rising Scholars postdoctoral fellow in the Department of Women, Gender, and Sexuality at the University of Virginia, and a New City Arts Fellow. Their visual and written work is interested in the visual and political cultures of the 21st century and how queer, trans, and non-binary people of color engage in forms of illegibility, unruliness, kin-making, escape, and refusal. Their work has been published in the Palgrave Handbook of Fashion and Politics, Terrorism and Popular Culture, and Swarm, Answering the Call. Um, Isabel received a PhD in political science from the University of California, Irvine, and is currently working on their book, All the Beloved I Couldn't Describe, Queer Illegibility, I probably mispronounced that, and 21st Century Crisis of Identity. So let's give a warm welcome to Isabel on their presentation.
Hello. Can everyone see my PowerPoint okay? Yes? Great. So thank you for attending first. I really am excited to have conversations with everyone. This is a truncated version of my work, a very, very truncated version of my work. So I'm really excited to hear all of the questions that will come up in the Q&A because I think it's going to help add context and fill in gaps where they're needed. And we can discuss how the most recent My Chemical Romance tour might overlap with some of the themes I explore here. But with that in mind, I'm just going to read, so let's get started. American rock band My Chemical Romance's 2006 concept album, The Black Parade, begins literally at the end. The first track, entitled The End, follows the album's unnamed protagonist in their final moments of life, functioning as a sonic death rattle, an expulsion of energy before collapse. But the end does not terminate cleanly, instead transforming or perhaps even transitioning to the album's second track, Dead. This dyad, or the end and dead, alongside the album's investment in beginning at the end or beginning through death, effaces a binary opposition between the living and the dead, the present and the absent, the here and the gone, the subject and the object. The End and Dead also introduce another theme of the album, which is this explicit reference to cross-gender embodiment. We have here this line that got ultimately went into the published album version. Another contusion, my funeral drag. Here's my resignation, I'll serve it in drag. You've got front row seats to the penitent's ball. When I grow up, I want to be nothing at all. The first live performance of this song before the album's ultimate publication is a little bit more explicit, stating another contusion, my funeral jag. You've made your conclusion, just call me a fag. You've got front row seats to the penitent's ball. When I grow up, I want to be nothing at all. Now, this is not the only line in the album expressing gendered opening, as My Chemical Romance fans know. The album's ninth track, Mama, has come to be known as the band's, quote, trans song for the following lines in the second stanza. Well, mother watched the war did to my legs and to my tongue. You should have raised a baby girl. I should have been a better son. If you can coddle the infection, they could amputate at once. You should have been, I could have been a better son. In live performances of Mama, the stickiest, most gender-troubling lines, you should have raised a baby girl, I should have been a better son, are not led by Gerard Way, the band's vocalist. Instead, Way turns the mic to the crowd, allowing audiences to vocalize this moment of crossing in community, in this living, writhing swarm, a form of collective catharsis. As one voice, the crowd comes together in mourning for that which could not, would not, should have, could have been. But at the same time, this line becomes one of embrace, a screaming affirmation for the capacity for shifting, undoing, and for fluidity. Like the flies, maggots, and vermin that are icons of the band's 2020 through 2022 Swarm or Return tour, the crowd is revolting insofar as, during such a moment, they enact a quotidian project of refusal, a collective circuit of revolt, one that was especially emphasized by Way's own stage presence. So Gerard Way was featured in the New York Times 2022 end-of-year roundup for most fashionable people, in part because of the gender transgression of the outfits donned while performing. And while it would be easy to dismiss stage outfits as a gimmick to titillate or shock, this interpretation does not capture the interconnective project of said objects. Consider then the following dialogue between Way and the crowd during the final leg of the Swarm or Return tour. Way says to the crowd, you all look wonderful. You do. I see you when the lights are bright on us. I see you. Don't worry, I see you. There's some wonderful costumes, if they're costumes. Are they costumes? A resounding no comes from the crowd. Gerard Way is silent for about 10 seconds and says, oh, if, that's fine. Oh, that's fine. This exchange is an exercise in simultaneity. Way affirms the crowd, those collective swarming bodies who give My Chemical Romance the cultural meaning that the band has accumulated over 2 decades, allowing them to affirm themselves, all against the backdrop of the right-wing political talking point that this is costume. But throughout this, Gerard Way also performs a rhetorical sleight of hand. By asking the crowd if they are costumed, Way answers a question about the skirts and dresses of the Swarm and Return tour without actually answering it. In acknowledging a question without offering a clear answer, Freudian slip, Way produces a clever form of escape through silence, one that, through acknowledging and being acknowledged by the crowd, produces a form of what I'm describing as a non-binary communion. By positing a question with a foregone conclusion, are they costumes? Way aligns with a kind of subjectivity, all the while remaining opaque in terms of self-identification, or in other words, moving beyond the easiness of clear identity. Gerard Way thus moves against legible modes of coming out, the very performative act that legitimizes, quote unquote, one as trans, non-binary, and or queer. This refusal to answer, this evasion of outing, led to speculation over Gerard Way's personal identification among fans, exacerbated by the fact that Way is notoriously private. In the lead up to the My Chemical Romance performance at the 2024 When We Were Young festival, the band's fandom overwhelmingly expected or maybe hoped for Gerard to show up on stage wearing a skirt once more. Instead, Wei showed up dressed in a plain black button-up and black pants, and notably with a cropped haircut, after sporting longer hair for almost a decade. This, too, I contend, was a mode of anti-identification, a refusing to be identified, a move towards ambiguity and opacity. Such ambiguity, which troubles normative processes of announcement, coming out, and teleological becoming, produces discomfort, friction, and contention, bad affects that My Chemical Romance fans sought to resolve. But I want to instead move from this frictive, indeterminate space of anti-identification. In other words, I want to move from the space that My Chemical Romance opens up, one filled with hauntings, rot, silence, and the neither dead nor living. Is this space of friction, of tension, of indeterminacy, of unresolvedness, of opacity, of unclarity, that I argue moves us towards a theory of non-binary, not as simply an identity, but as a gendered politic, which is to say, a mode of non-binary without the normativizing processes that non-binary identity might produce. Such an anti-identity, I argue, is not a disavowal of community, but a production of it, one that's representative of emo as a genre's role, genre, community, subculture, artistic aesthetic, all of those capacious meanings, right? Representative of emo's role in embracing forms of gendered failure. What Gerard Way's continuous performances show is that emo's performances of gendered failure offer escape routes from what Sarah Ahmed might describe as gender's fatalism. Now, this performance of gendered failure, we have the gendered part, but we also have this failure part, right? We can't really split those from emo's embrace then of maladaptive affect or bad feelings. And so here, very briefly, I want to turn to Fall Out Boy and Pete Wentz. As the bassist, primary lyricist, and media spokesperson for the band, Pete Wentz is the thrumming heartbeat of Fall Out Boy, with many lyrics being autobiographical, including explicit references to his experiences with addiction, suicidality, bipolar disorder, paranoia, and breaks from shared reality. This, rather than being something that needs to be fixed, something that needs to be recovered, instead produces a kind of gender disruptive potential through maladaptive affect, one that is made most explicit in the band's 2023 album, So Much for Stardust. I'm only going to turn to one of the Stardust songs today, just for the sake of time, but I'm happy to discuss more of the songs in Q&A. And that song's going to be The Kintsugi Kid or 10 Years. So the Kintsugi Kid or 10 Years, like another couple of the songs from So Much for Stardust, kind of cribs from other songs that they were inspired by or that the band was inspired by. And in particular, this song cribs from Don Henley's nostalgia anthem for the yuppie generation, The Boys of Summer, right? So whereas The Boys of Summer is kind of slow, meandering, like a nostalgic memory, this is at a quicker tempo and a higher pitch. And whereas Henley's Boys of Summer is a grown man's straightforward reflection on the wild boyhood he outgrew, the Kintsugi Kid isn't about reliving one's glory days, but instead about missing one's worst days, right? While Henley's narrator moves forward, Pete Wentz, as the narrator or as the lyricist of this particular song, stagnates, feeling, doing, being nothing, 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 nothing. So there's this line in Don Henley's Boys of Summer: out on the road today, I saw a Deadhead sticker on a Cadillac. You know, I'm blanking on the lyrics right now. You can't move back. You can never look back, right? But here in the Kintsugi Kid, we have, I spent 10 years in a bit of chemical haze and I missed the way that I felt nothing, 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 right? So it's this, rather than moving forward towards proper reproductive citizenship, it's this stagnation, this kind of glitch in time, right? And so reiterating Pete Wentz's out of time telos or out of time approach to developmentalism, against Henley's normative developmentalism, is the song's outro. These lonely puppy howls that, though performed by Pete Wentz's daughter, come to embody Pete Wentz himself, glitching both age and gender, or collapsing the father with the daughter, collapsing masculinity with the girlhood femininity, collapsing this sort of out of time boyhood with this future potential adult, maybe womanhood, right? And thus problematizing Pete Wentz's position as a properly reproductive subject. As a symbol of a mad, malign genre and subculture, Pete Wentz's maladaptive affect infuses emo in its gendered and racialized potentiality. This then offers non-binary or a non-binary political theory that moves beyond the long-bandied neoliberal platitudes of it gets better and moves us beyond, towards something else, towards coalition and power in the depressed, the deranged, and the inconceivable. So very, very briefly, to conclude and to pull everything together, I want to turn to theorist Marquise Bay's description of non-binary. For Bay, non-binary embraces the possibility of the unexpected, of the unknown, of radical self-undetermination that can facilitate a different kind of encounter. So this mode of radical undetermination then embraces the friction produced by ambiguity, and in doing so allows for change and transformation without destination. Or to quote Bay, can we be non-binary even if we don't feel it, but damn sure think it, yearn for it, want it proliferated throughout the world as a dormant detonator to the gender binary? I'll be your detonator in a lot of ways, to quote My Chemical Romance. Because what you really want to say when they ask the question, how do you identify, which they do when being polite or genuinely opening space for you, because that happens too, is I don't. I don't identify breaches the tyrannically violent hold of subjectification within the Western universalized logics of the human. It answers the question of what do you want to become with the My Chemical Romance song that begun this talk. When I grow up, I want to be nothing at all. Non-binary as such breaches the hold of identity through processes of embracing the frictive, explosive, unsettling potentiality that indeterminacy, silence, madness, and refusal produce. But this is not an individualistic project. Like Gerard Way's radical circuit of recognition, speaking to the crowd and being seen by the crowd, or like Pete Wentz's lyrics brought to life through Patrick Stump's voice, it is only through this radical communality that such a non-binary can exist. Such a horizon of non-binary allows for a refusal of the binary opposition between the here and the gone, the true and the untrue, the false or the true, the costume or the non-costume. As in its infinite acknowledgement, non-binary as such may facilitate different kinds of encounters with those other than ourselves, or perhaps with our other unruly selves. In this moment where the state consolidates its hold through narrowing gender's disciplinary power, emo's non-binary beyond non-binary identity may be a useful tool for elusive survival in violent times. Thank you.
All right, that was wonderful. Yeah. Okay, we're gonna move on to our final panelists. So, Mikayla, I'm gonna read their bio real quick. Mikayla Elias is a poet and storyteller who recently earned. Oh, do we have a hand up? Okay. Who recently earned an MA in creative writing from Queen Mary University of London. Their work leans into processing trauma and pressing towards intersectional equity and can be found in publications across the digital and physical world, including Carencia Press, Waxing and Waning Journal, and Let's Spread the Word. Michaela's debut poetry collection, Bending Toward the Light, was released in 2022. So give it up.
Hello. Let me share my screen real fast. Da, da, da. Hold on one second. My computer is angry. Thank you all for coming. I'm super excited about this and excited to talk with such, really wonderful folks about emo music. I see. Hold on. Computer preferences are locked. So updated. Well, Logan, you have my slides. Would you mind projecting those? Thank you. Technology is hard sometimes. But yeah, I used to work in the music industry and then became a poet. Went to Queen Mary University of London, as Logan mentioned in my intro, and I went through my dissertation discussing Fall Out Boy. What my project kind of centered around was the discography of Fall Out Boy and writing poetically towards it, which has turned into the project that I'm working on right now titled Iconography. Um, we'll totally dive into that some more um, as we go on. But kind of what I wanted to discuss was the importance of emo in creating this dissertation that has later expanded to become this project that I'm working on, this manuscript. So Logan, would you switch to the next slide, please? Excellent. So I'm thinking of emo and meaning making as like this nebulous kind of third space, um, and how subversion and encouragement of queering a subculture kind of comes into the discussion. So some of this is, obviously going to tie into the queer research that Isabel has been doing, and some of those queer thematics that Logan has discovered in My Chemical Romance and comic work. But we see that emo subverts genre in the way that it makes definition difficult to lock into one place. I'm thinking in that sense of people discussing what is emo, what are the waves of emo, what's pop punk, what's post hardcore, and all of it kind of falls into this umbrella of unknowing. You're creating this space that is more important linguistically to the listener. You go to an emo night and it's everything that I've listed previously. And then I'm thinking about how emo subverts language, primarily with the use of double entendre. You get a lot of coded language that allows for a lack of clarity, and allows the listener to impress their experiences upon this kind of vague yet specific experience that the lyricist is bringing up and troubling us with. Um, so double entendre and um, other kind of coded language allows for that play between the artist and the listener. Um, and then the cultural expectations of the early aughts, in this third wave of emo, um, you're looking at a space that is typically really hyper masculine, this kind of dad rock, new metal, classic rock. It's very hyper masculine, it's very misogynistic, it's not allowing for a lot of expansion. And then you're looking at the hyper feminine of the Paris Hilton, the Gwen Stefani, the kind of like thin, rich white as the hyper feminine stereotype. And emo isn't really either of those. And it's creating this queer space for people to play with fashion and to play with identity. You've got long hair on masked people, feminine people. Like you've got the skinny jeans that were a huge debate of fashion in the early aughts. These kind of gender skewing fashion trends that are based out of the culture of emo. Um, but I digress. So, this nebulous space of meaning making kind of leads towards the meaning making of poetry. Logan, would you mind going to the next slide? Thank you. So I'm thinking of poetic autobiography in the sense of how it relates to Pete Wentz's lyricism. Um, Poetic autobiography, I think, comes into the picture with the discussion of, is poetry autobiographical, or is it a narrator relaying a story to you? In my personal opinion, I think a lot of poetry is very explicitly autobiographical, which ties into emo music. There's a lot of autobiographical discussion within, is the singer creating a space to share their internal monologue, or are they creating a character space? Um, so with Pete Wentz, he's creating in Fall Out Boy's lyrics this poetic autobiography. And we see that in the deeply personal interviews of him discussing his suicide attempt and how that's impacted various songs, and his infamous live journal entries, which, if you're not familiar with, are very explicit and like direct pulls from Fall Out Boy lyrics. So the live journal entries explicitly become Fall Out Boy lyrics. Um, and there's a lot of coded language that comes in this lyricism that kind of confronts this unwelcoming mainstream. We see Pete Wentz in the current Shit Boy shirt, which I am also wearing. Um, and, at the time, he was the it boy. He was in magazines, like doing makeup and in all these sort of different cultural spaces that were really hostile to him. And that comes along in the autobiographical poetry of Fall Out Boy's lyrics. So all that to say, I you can go to the next slide, Logan. Thank you so much for doing this. Um, so that brings me to iconography, which is the manuscript that I'm working on now, which is a collection of poetry that complicates youth and the legacy thereof, based fundamentally on Fall Out Boy's discography. We can flip to the next slide. So what I'm considering in creating iconography is encountering the music itself, from a personal perspective. What does that mean for my autobiographical meaning making? How am I impressing my fan interaction onto this live journal that Pete Wentz is presenting to us through music? And I'm also thinking about location as memory. How does the music kind of queer our youth with our legacy, and how does the act of listening to music hold those two spaces together? Um, and I'm also thinking about this lowbrow artistic stereotype of emo. You get pop culture works and tomes and dissertations about people like Taylor Swift, like Madonna, these huge pop icons. But then you look at the pop icon of the emo 2000s scene, and you're not taken quite as seriously. So this lowbrow aesthetic, I think, stems from the fan experience. And it stems from that interaction between the fan and the band, and how that personalization isn't taken as seriously in the greater mainstream. So that's what I'm looking at. I have a collection of some poems that I would love to share later on if y'all are interested, some poems that I'm working on, but that's what I'm cooking with at this moment in time. Oh, yes. Those are the poems. We can totally revisit those, Logan.
All right. Thank you so much, Michaela, for that. Let's see, it's 12:44 right now. I'd like to give folks in the chat and the audience opportunity to ask some questions. So I'm going to stop screen sharing. So yeah, if you want to unmute yourself or drop something in the chat, I would love to hear y'all's thoughts.
I have a quick question for the most recent presentation. Also, hi, thank you guys so much. This is really fun. Um, I know you shouted out Taylor Swift, and one of the things I actually think is quite interesting is Taylor Swift has referenced that Fall Out Boy is a big inspiration for her. And actually, I think when you listen to their music, you can kind of hear that in how they write. And I'm curious, I think Taylor Swift has received a ton of criticism around like the subject matter that she has written with, especially kind of early on in her career. And you noted that that basically like a lot of Fall Out Boy's music has been dismissed, I think probably like critically in terms of its content. But I'm curious how much of that you think might come from the fact that it was in sort of like a pre-poptimism or just like early poptimism space. And also too, simultaneously, how much of it, if you think that the opinion of that has changed with their more recent albums, just both being like in a different period of time musically, but then also to them being like more mature artists, like if you feel like that has impacted the way they've been perceived at all.
Yeah, so the Taylor Swift question, she's actually worked with them several times, which is very cool. I think it was the Victoria's Secret 2014 uh, performance they collaborated on, and um, Patrick Stump is also on one of the songs in the Fearless Taylor's version re-release, which is very cool. And I think that that cross genre play is really, really interesting to kind of dive into a little bit deeper. Um, and I suppose the second half of kind of what you're addressing is like there's this kind of pop legitimacy that I think has come recently um, because of the cultural shift in technology. We're thinking about the early aughts when there was a ton of new technology that was new to everyone, and we're ripping unreleased songs off of um, Napster, and I think people were kind of intimidated by that intimacy, but now people kind of expect it out of pop artists. So I think that cultural change is really interesting and has impacted a lot of pop artists. But I think I'll try and wrap up my thoughts real fast. I think also about Fall Out Boy's more recent work. I think it's almost legitimized in that sense of nostalgia. We're seeing this emo revival that is really nostalgia heavy. Um, and I think that almost becomes like a topic of research, like a topic of historical research, which kind of legitimizes them in this like historical sense. But they're a legacy artist, still releasing albums, still selling out tours, that kind of like Metallica legacy artist energy.
Thank you so much. That makes total sense. And I think that actually kind of gets at what I don't know that I just did a great job asking at in the first place, which is like, do you think it's the dismissiveness of youth and kind of like the opinion of like very youthful, sort of relatively inexperienced artists, or do you think it is more of a genre thing? So I think you answered that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's great. And we have some really good a comment from Isabel. Fall Out Boy is pre-early poptimism. Fall Out Boy playfully describing themselves as Chicago softcore. I love that. And then also Kelly Waldorf had a comment that kind of connected to this stigma, and they said, "I've noticed over the years that more so recently that the people who stigmatize emos and emo culture tend to be the people who identified as emos in their teen years and seem to want to distance themselves from it in adulthood." Reflecting on this, I imagine it probably has something to do with not wanting to associate oneself with a dark time. And it is sad for some people that they completely rid themselves of all self emo memories. That's really good. And then we had a question from Jennifer Humphrey. Thoughts on some of the lyrics from Fall Out Boys? Thanks for the memories, specifically the chorus, "He tastes like you, but sweeter."
Izzy, you might have some thoughts on we talked about this in a Yap session once about like distancing yourself from like the illegitimacy of teenhood. So I'd love to discourse with you about that one.
About this comment about people kind of gatekeeping emo almost, or like saying like, well, I don't like emo, I'm into hardcore. I used to be into that, but now I'm no longer that, versus like,
Yeah.
or do you mean the thanks for the memories question?
Oh, I was thinking the kind of like reverse gatekeepy, like, ah, that's not me anymore kind of vibe.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that there is this, and so I guess full cards on the table. I don't primarily consider myself an emo studies scholar. I consider myself a scholar of visual and political cultures of the early 21st century. And I think that as we start to see the development of particular narratives around self-becoming and self-making, particularly post, I would say, like it gets better, right? We start to have the kind of I killed my younger self version of uh art articulating one's autobiography, right? So I remember early in 2020 there was a very popular trans slash non-binary slash like just alternative TikTok audio, which was like, I missed the old you, slash, I gutted that bitch from the inside out. And I think that that speaks to a kind of yearning for a kind of like linear becoming where you abandon the younger self and you abandon the parts of oneself that developed into who one was. When, I think that that developmentalist narrative, when we think about developmentalism just as a whole, right? It has so much to do with the imagining of who is fully human. So developmentalism within the context of particularly like the global South says these people are not fully human because they have not developed in this particular singular linear way. And I think that attachment reflects itself in these kind of narratives of becoming, and they in the narratives of, well, I am no longer this cringe thing because I am ascended, right? When it's actually like, no, these parts of oneself reflect different ways of being, different sort of attachments that we might have to um, different parts that can tell us something or move us away from that very strictly developmentalist narrative that is really restricting and really rooted in lots of logics of domination and hierarchy. Or at least that's what I'm pushing towards and thinking through, like the fixedness, the stuckness of Pete Wentz, the idea of I miss when I was in active addiction. I think that that's something that takes us somewhere beyond the logics of developmentalism, beyond the logics of ascending towards greatness or ascending towards the most ubermensch version of oneself as the narrative of becoming. And then I
I
guess,
think you, interestingly, could also tie that into fandom experiencing new albums and experiencing new discography and the fan return to I liked it better when it was this way. Uh, and kind of complicating going back to your kind of roots, thinking Mania versus So Much for Stardust, kind of going back to those roots in a way that troubles those roots and kind of looks at that legacy and says, hey, things are different. And I don't know if I'm actually yearning entirely for that period of time, or am I incredibly yearning for that period of time? I think that that creates a lot of discourse around discography as an idea.
Yeah. And I think too, the question of Mania and Stardust, I think they're twins, right? They're siblings. Like all of the albums in the discography are siblings, but Mania and Stardust are especially intertwined because they're just talking about the same themes, but with different, you know, styles, which I think is interesting because if we want to, return to the idea of nostalgia, of return, return is impossible. The yearning towards nostalgia is actually quite a regressive politic in a lot of ways because it also takes us to, well, remember when things were better back then? Here are the political goals that we need to do to get us there. Um, and so I think that the stuckness in past also problematizes that sort of like, well, the past wasn't great, but I do wish that I was like not a full, like, not fully reproductive in this sort of normative citizenship way. Or even when we think about, well, returning to one's roots, Mania perhaps returns even closer to Pete Wentz's roots because it's rooted in a lot of like Afro-Caribbean music that he probably listened to with his mother versus like, oh, well, he's not hardcore anymore,
Mhm.
which I think is a very interesting thing bandied about by Pete Wentz or people who are suspicious of Pete Wentz in the big H hardcore scene.
Mhm.
And I guess, yeah, to respond to the question from Jennifer Humphrey about thoughts on Thanks for the Memories. He tastes like you, but only sweeter. That's Pete Wentz. That's yeah, it's another one of those lyrics I think that comes out in discussing like, oh, these are the ways that he's playing with gender and playing with sexuality while not explicitly quote unquote coming out.
Yeah, that subtext, or in some cases text, is what's really fun about these bands. And there's some research is done calling it like stage gay or stage queer, but honestly, with all this evidence we've kind of uncovered today, I think I would have to reject that for sure. Um, yeah, Izzy, I had a question for you. I know you went to the My Chem show at San Francisco this weekend, and you're doing some research. I'd like to hear about that process and maybe some kind of initial observations. I know you have to sit on it a little bit, but
Yeah.
I would like to hear about that. Yeah, get
So
on
I
the
guess,
record.
yeah, for context, I was recruiting for interviews, and I am recruiting for interviews with queer, trans, and non-binary My Chemical Romance fans. So it self-identificatory, right? So it's like if you identify under these umbrellas, it doesn't matter what the specific micro identity or like macro identity might be. Come talk to me, particularly at these shows, because I think having conversations with people is beautiful. Um, and the first response that I got, or at least the first thought that I have, is that I feel very honored to be trusted as caretaker of many of these testimonies. It feels very sobering to have so much trust given and so much responsibility to caretake for these testimonies and a lot of these very intimate histories that strangers are giving willingly and freely. So that's one response that I got, or one reaction that I got that sticks out. Another reaction that I got that sticks out isn't necessarily about the contents of the interviews, but about being, a guy with a sign at a concert. Um, I think that there's this tension between how My Chemical Romance fans understand the fandom as this beautiful queer space, but also the reactions that one might get from people attending the concert when you're holding a sign that says, hey, queer, trans, and non-binary people, come talk to me. Because part of it is like people will kind of like look at you and just brush you off because when you're a guy with a sign, people are like I don't know what's going on. I think I'm going to be exploited. But there were also some strange comments from people where I would be standing out with the sign, and these people clearly there for the concert would be like, "Oh, are you queer, trans, or non-binary?" to their friends, kind of in a sarcastic, making fun of way. And so it's this really interesting, I think, product of not just the fact that they are now a legacy act, but a product of a lot of the unresolved tensions that the genre posits, because it is, at the end of the day, a genre that was produced as this commercial object, right? And so, as a commercial object, it's going to have these sorts of mass appeals in ways that I think um, could potentially go against some of the things that we're hoping to uncover. At least that's what I'm saying in my own sort of work. So yeah, and in the show was great. I loved the show. It was incredible. I'm still like processing the fact that all of that happened and I got to witness the Smashing Pumpkins cover live. So yeah, that's initial off the cuff thoughts.
Yeah, I love that, and I love that they covered Smashing Pumpkins because if you'll go back into the band's biography, like Gerard Way was this, reclusive cartoonist, but Mikey got him to actually go out of his room and go to the Smashing Pumpkins show. Was it the big arena in Jersey, I guess, where the Nets used to play, and it kind of, it's one of the foundational elements and it'll be interesting to kind of study the connection because very, very different ideologies behind it. Um, yeah, so it's 1 o'clock, and if anyone had any last questions or anything, I do want to ask Mikayla one question about their poetry. But if anybody had any last questions, I know folks might have other meetings and things to go to, but I'd be willing to stay a little bit later. Yeah, thank you for everyone who showed up for this. Like I was so happy. I've never done a virtual panel before, so I'm glad, and I'm glad there's interest in this genre and exploring it in a queer way. Oh, thank you.
Also, were you asking me if I was able to hang around, or was that a general?
Oh, I was seeing. I wanted to just get you on the record about. Oh, thank you,
Cool.
Greg. Just about your poems.
Yeah.
I'm curious. What goes into your process of choosing the different albums to write these ekphrastic poems about? Like why certain albums? Because fall like I feel like with Fall Out Boy, I mostly it's probably because of my age. I mostly listen to those first couple albums, but I was just curious about that.
Yeah, so I actually went through all of the albums, and kind of had the same process with them. With each of them, I had this like song by song analysis of each studio album. And I was looking for thematic material that both aligned within the album itself and with the greater discography. Um, so I was looking for, phrasing, what kind of works in context, like sonically, rhythmically, that kind of stuff. But I was also looking for the commonalities between the songs that creates this world within the album and then lends itself to this greater world of the discography. So what I had intended to do was just the studio releases, which is I think what I'm sticking to is just the studio 8 albums that they have released up until this point. Um, because those are what has attracted the mainstream. And how has that reached the most populous audience, um, versus digging into like the Lake Effect Kid EP, which is some of my favorite Fall Out Boy, or the Pac Sam Days EP, those kind of deep cuts. I didn't delve into so much as they're more of a more narrow kind of discussion. So maybe I release iconography B-sides about those.
That's great. Yeah, going through the whole discography. Yeah, in preparation of this panel, I did listen to Fall Out Boy's full discography the first time, and it's so cool. And I love like Patrick Stump's kind of his soul roots. I listened to his solo album, Soul Punk, very, very underrated. So yeah, no, I'm excited. I definitely plan on getting a copy of Iconography when it drops. So thank you so much. And thanks for everyone who attended this panel. Said that a little bit earlier. Just wanted to get that last thoughts on the record. And this will be recorded. It'll be up on the CPM YouTube page in the next few days. So stay out for that. I'll post about it on our socials. So yeah, thank you. I'm gonna hit the stop recording.